Hello and welcome to Current Affairs on JTV. Today we're joined by American political commentator Dave Rubin, who is of course the founder and host of the show The Rubin Report. Dave, great to have you with us on JTV. I'm going to start with a fairly wide-ranging question. Now it's well known that your political journey has been quite documented over the last few years. You've gone from progressivism to somewhere that's perhaps not progressivism anymore. Tell us about the driving forces behind that.
Yeah, well, I grew up and I was always a liberal. My first sort of intro to politics, beyond just arguing with my family, which my family was always arguing about politics, extended family, Jews, if you have 3 Jews, you have 4 opinions. So I grew up in a family that was always, arguing and debating politics and everything else. But the first time I really got interested in politics specifically was the 1988 presidential election, which was Michael Dukakis as the Democrat running against George H.W. Bush, so W's father.
But that was a terrible time to be a liberal.
Well, at the time, I remember vividly when I realized something was going on here, because at the time I thought that, most, especially Jews and Northeast Jews, were pretty much all Democrats from the 50s on. That was sort of like, in a way, it was almost like a replacement for religion, I guess. And I remember in that campaign thinking that the liberals were the good guys. Liberals cared about poor people, they cared about minorities, gays, et cetera, and that Republicans were kind of evil and they didn't care about any of these things and they only cared about money and all that. And I remember in the election that at one point, George H.W. Bush called Dukakis a liberal, and Dukakis said something like, "I'm no liberal." And I remember thinking, how does that make any sense? Liberals are the good guys. Now, flash forward about 20 years, and I studied politics in college. Actually, I did a semester at Beersheba University in Israel, at Ben Gurion University in Beersheba. And you get to sort of about 5 years ago, and I was firmly on the left. I thought the progressives really were right about a lot of this stuff. And then suddenly I started realizing that leftism and liberalism have very little to do with each other. Classical liberalism really is rooted in the rights of the individual, that you should be judged as an individual, not as a member of a group. That's where your rights come from. That's how you should be treated. Progressivism and modern leftism really treats people as a group. So if you are Black, you should think this way, or if you're Muslim, you should think this way, if you're gay this way, Jewish this way, whatever it is. And this creates an endless competing oppression Olympics where all of these groups that view their victimhood as virtue have to constantly be more victimized than the other group. And that's why we see so much infighting with these groups. So basically, once I saw that, it started a cascade effect where suddenly I realized almost nothing that the modern left was offering really made any sense if you believe in true liberalism, which really is what the Constitution's about: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
But was there one cathartic moment? You say 5 years ago. What happened 5 years ago? Why was it then? Why not 10? Why not 3?
Yeah, so there were 2 moments. So October, I think it was of 2015, maybe 2014. Sam Harris was on Real Time with Bill Maher. It's a very internet famous moment. He was on with Ben Affleck. I didn't know who Sam Harris was. He was a mild-mannered neuroscientist, and they were talking about religion. And basically he said that, Islam is a set of ideas like any other, like Judaism, like Christianity, like a political set of ideas. The Democrats have a set of ideas, a party platform, and that a set of ideas is worthy of criticism, and that you can criticize a set of ideas, and that doesn't mean you're being bigoted towards the people who prescribe to those ideas, so in this case, Muslim people. And he talked about sort of the circles where you have nominal Muslims, like most secular Jews, who take some parts somewhat seriously, somewhat not seriously. Then you have Islamists who want to use the political machinations of the West against itself. Then you have jihadists who want to use violence to further their goals. And basically, it's a famous moment now, but Ben Affleck, in effect, called Sam Harris and Bill Maher gross and racist. Bill Maher, who had stood for every leftist principle ever, Bill Maher, who had always sided with minorities and fought for progressivism constantly. But what I realized after that was suddenly the media had a feeding frenzy where the onus became on Bill Maher and Sam Harris to suddenly prove that they were not gross and racist, even though there was no evidence of it, including anything that was said right there. And then suddenly I was working at the Young Turks at the time. They were
Yes.
a pretty far left network. And I never felt I was completely as left as they were, because I always did consider myself liberal. But once I really saw the way they treated that, but the way the media as a whole treated it, I started seeing something really wrong with this reactionary way that the left operates. Then only a few months later was Charlie Hebdo. And the amount of people on the left that kept saying, oh, the cartoonist shouldn't have done this, or we have to be more respectful of people. I mean, this is the soft bigotry of low expectations, that if you draw a cartoon of something, well, then perhaps you should be killed. Well, the same people who don't want you to draw cartoons, they're actually not cool with any of the other purported progressive values like gay rights and et cetera, et cetera. And that really was the final straw for me.
But it's worse than that in a sense. What you've just highlighted is fascinating, because the Charlie Hebdo case isn't the whole history, essentially, of the Western Enlightenment freedom from compulsion of religion and blasphemy and items like that?
Of course, and this is the ultimate irony. Charlie Hebdo, from every piece that I've ever read and from everything that I've seen of theirs, they were not bigoted. They were making fun. First off, they were making fun of all religions. There were, there were covers making fun of Orthodox Jews. There were plenty of covers making fun of the Pope. But if we put one set of ideas as we're not going to touch that, well, then that set of ideas will just keep growing. It'll keep encroaching on the rest of our freedoms. And we see this all the time now. I mean, you guys in Europe have it far worse, I think, related to free speech and free expression than we have it in the United States. But there's no doubt that this terrible set of ideas is growing here, especially in our campuses. So that's why you have to fight it. And the only way to fight it, by the way, is to treat people as individuals, which, again, that's what classical liberalism is. And, people ask me, well, wait a minute, that really sounds like libertarianism, and we can get into that if you want. But basically, the only way to fight any totalitarian set of ideas, whether it's radical Islam or socialism or anything else, is with liberalism, is with Enlightenment values, is with secularism. And sadly, it's the progressives who pretend that they're for all these things the most that have aligned themselves with an ideology that pretty much will kill them one day. They don't realize it now, perhaps, but guess what? It will come for them.
So is it a case that you left the left, or was it a case the left left you, or did you realize actually you were never of the left in the first place?
I'd say it's a little bit of both. Look, I have not changed that much. I would say in the last couple of years, I've changed a little bit economically, because once you start understanding really what freedom is, then you realize that the government doesn't have that much of a right, and in America's case, really has virtually no right to tell you what to do. The government, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and we have the Bill of Rights, which delineate several other rights, like the right to bear arms and the right to free speech, etc. It is a beautiful, an absolutely beautiful secular document that separates church and state, while actually at the same time many of the founders were somewhat religious, or at least deists. They believed in something, but they understood why you have to separate these things. So I would say I've shifted in some ways, because now I always shift towards individual freedom. Individual freedom always is the answer to me. Less government control is always the answer to me. The government, and again, I speak from an American perspective, the government is pretty much good at nothing. And this is the irony right now, is, you have all these people on the left that are screaming about Trump all day long. They're hashtag resist, all the women's march and the hats and the whole thing. They don't even know what they're resisting, but what they should be doing is fighting for the way the Constitution was written. If you don't like Trump, the answer is to limit executive power, limit the power of the office that he sits in. And guess what? The trade-off on that is, well, if you got Bernie Sanders one day, well, you would have limited his power too. But that's actually good, because we're not supposed to have a king. There's a reason we left you guys, no offense. You know what I mean? We're not supposed to have a monarchy. Actually, maybe we could use a little bit of that. I'm watching The Crown right now on Netflix.
The Crown's pretty good, yes.
Yeah, I'm watching The Crown right now on Netflix, and I do see some sort of relevance to having a sort of a monarchy, or at least a figurehead, versus a prime minister who's actually doing the work. And we sort of have them both now in Trump, And I think that creates a terrible cult of personality. And you can see it even the way they're talking about Oprah 2020 now. But in effect, I did not shift that much. I've shifted towards freedom. The left, however, and I warned about this, the first 2 years of my show as an interview show, every week I kept saying, guys, lefties, liberals, let's get this in order. Let's fight identity politics. Let's fight for liberalism, because otherwise it will lead to the rise of a Trump or something much worse. Because actually, at this point, I don't think Trump is that bad. I think he's actually done some good stuff. But unfortunately, the left happens to be led by its worst devices in almost every case, and I see no sign that there's any stopping that.
Well, okay, so that helps explain that move on your part there. Now, it's interesting, you reference the Young Turks, of course, and that was where you got your sort of break into sort of the big league politics in commentary terms. But obviously there was a rather famous breakup, if we like, from that. And part of that clearly is down to the differences on Islam. Maybe you want to go into that a bit, because I think it's kind of pivotal to this discussion. You've stated, of course, that the problem essentially from the left's point of view was that it didn't recognise the ideological nature of Islam. Was that something particular that you felt the Young Turks failed in?
Well, look, I mean, I would say that Cenk, who's the head of the Young Turks, that really it would be about him. It's not really worth discussing.
Okay, so it's not the whole,
Yeah, it's not worth discussing any other anchors. Yes, that event basically, in my view, caused him to really go off the deep end, unfortunately. And he had Sam Harris in afterwards for a 3-hour interview, and it was just an absolute debacle. And no matter how many times Sam tried to explain the difference between people and ideas, and by the way, Sam never once in that interview and in the hours that I've interviewed him subsequently, or the many hours I've spent listening to his podcasts or anything else, I've never heard him say one bigoted thing ever. I've been out with him with Muslim people. I mean, so unfortunately, that line of thinking, it's muddled thinking. That's really what it is. It's not critical thinking, it's muddled thinking. That you can't separate people from ideas. You have to be able to critique bad ideas. I mean, look, we can just look at it this way. There are 40 some odd, depending on how you define it, Muslim majority nations in the world. Those countries are simply not good for any minority to live in. I mean, find a Jew in a Muslim majority country, right? Find a Christian there now. Christians are being persecuted all over in the Middle East, except that one country that the left hates the most. Of course, I'm talking about Israel. So this, without getting too far in the weeds on Cenk specifically or TYT, I think that what happened there really was a marker for me of how corrupt the thinking of the left was. And that's why when I talk now to libertarians and I talk to conservatives, so if I have, Glenn Beck on or Ben Shapiro or Dennis Prager, people that years ago I would have thought were my enemy, I go, you know what, all right, maybe I disagree with them a little bit on gay marriage, or I'm pro-choice, they're pro-life, I'm against the death penalty, they're for it. But we have a basic sense of we want to live in the same society. We believe that this society has to be pluralistic and be okay with the 350 million of us who believe all sorts of different things. That's the most important part. And unfortunately, everybody, I mean, I have a zillion guests in this very studio who've gone through this. The second you leave the orthodoxy of the left, they automatically purge you out. The right at the moment, and this could change over time, the right at the moment is very welcoming. They're trying to make a wide tent of libertarians, neocons, conservatives, etc. The left is saying, you're with us or you're against us. And that's why you see this with professors, you see this on college campuses. I see this when I go speak, and kids who are libertarians, all they are basically small government libertarians. They want to smoke weed, they don't care what you do in your private life. They are basically being silenced on campus. This is not hyperbole, this is not exaggeration. This is real. And this is why there's such a massive realignment happening in this country, but in your country as well, and I think it's happening all over the world.
Well, it's interesting you're focusing quite a bit on campuses. I think that's been a particular issue in our society and your society when it comes to freedoms and discussion, the idea of safe spaces, the sort of shouting down of views that some regard as unpalatable. Are we essentially creating now a generation of people who are just not exposed to a balanced set of arguments?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, colleges right now truly are as bad as you think they are. And even if you would have asked me this a few months ago, I would have said, is it really that bad? Could it be that bad? I go to colleges. I speak at colleges all the time right now. My spring is booked up, bouncing around all over the country from college to college. And I'm telling you, when these kids show up here, the questions, when we do Q&As at the end, they ask me questions. You know, one of the ones that I get the most is they'll say that their teachers are jamming down this leftist, progressive, postmodern nonsense. And that their question is, can I speak up? Can I speak up because I still want to get the grade? I want to get into grad school. I want to get the good job after. And a year ago, I answered the question, and I used to say to them, you know what, maybe suck it up for now. Get the grade. You know what you think. Get the grade so that you can move on and get out. And I've really had a shift on this after getting this question so many times. At this point, I say to them, you know what? Look, everyone can make an individual choice, right? I believe in individual choice. But if I were you, you have to speak up now. If you will not speak up when you are in college, it will never get easier. If you make that choice in your mind to be quiet, so that when you get out of college and now you're married and you got a kid and you got a mortgage and a dog, it doesn't get easier. You won't suddenly magically finding yourself speak up. So speaking up now is the most important thing you can do. But yes, this leftist, postmodern, progressive, whatever you want to call it, this oppression Olympics, this constant victimhood. That victimhood is virtue. Victimhood is not virtue. Victimhood is something that you should try to get out of. And that's what capitalism and freedom allows you to do, and upward mobility. Yes, that doesn't mean our system is perfect, but it does mean that there's great opportunity here, and that's been proven time and again. So the college thing is as bad as you think it is, and that's why when Ben Shapiro speaks at Berkeley, it costs them $600,000 for a mainstream conservative thinker. All Ben Shapiro is sort of, he basically thinks the things that Ronald Reagan thought. Ben Shapiro is not a hater in the slightest. I've never heard him say anything bigoted. But $600,000 so that Ben Shapiro, a yarmulke-wearing Orthodox Jew, could speak at Berkeley, once the home of free speech in America.
Well, now you've highlighted the problem. You know, we've discussed the problem here. What's the solution to this?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
We've discussed the problem. What is the solution to this?
Well, the solution, there is only one solution, and that is the relentless, unwavering fight for free speech. We have the right to free speech in this country that I think in most European countries you guys wish you had the way we have it here.
Yeah,
and not only European countries, Canada now has problems related to free speech because their rights aren't as enshrined as ours are. Australia has some problems right now, many other countries. But the West as a whole has a free speech issue on its hands, and the United States laws at the moment guarantee the most ability for a citizen to say and think whatever they want. I don't care what you think. Look, I have a set of beliefs that I try to live my life by. I fail often, but that I try to espouse. And I hope that some people will hear that message, and I guess some people do, and that's why they dig my show. But at the end of the day, I will defend, and I do defend, even the people whose ideas I think are horrible. So Linda Sarsour, who is a darling of the left, who I think is a true anti-Semite, and I don't use that phrase, I mean, I think she's a true bigot. I don't use that phrase softly or lightly. She is embraced by the left. You know, Bernie Sanders is tweeting out, "I stand with Linda." The mainstream left loves this woman. Now, she was invited to speak at the CUNY graduation, City University of New York graduation. I defended her publicly, even though I despise her. I would prefer that they not invite her. I would prefer that they go, wait a minute, this woman's ideas are just terrible, and we don't want her here. But once they extend that invite, I'm not for shutting that down. You can go and protest, but you can't violently protest. You can't break the law when you're doing it. And I would say that the only answer to this is it's tough, right? It's tough to stand up for things when it's not comfortable to do so. But otherwise, saying you're free for free speech when you only defend it when it's the people you like isn't really that. So we have to defend free speech. We have to defend Enlightenment values, secularism, a separation of church and state, and also not give the words bigot and racist and the made-up word Islamophobe. We have to not give these words such credence. If you're not a bigot, someone calling you a bigot shouldn't matter anymore. And I know it hurts, and I know no one wants to be called that, and social media and Twitter and Facebook, it makes it all worse. but you have to stand up for what you believe in, because there's a lot of bad people right now. There's a lot of bad actors right now that have no problem taking away your rights, telling you how horrible you are. But if you're not, you better stand up for it now. Because you think it's going to get any easier in 5 years? You think it's going to get any easier for your kids? It's actually going to get a lot worse, and that'll be on your head. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, for whatever reason I'm doing it.
Well, no. Look, the idea of standing up is very important. But do you think this idea of safe spaces, for example, is that incompatible with free speech?
The basic premise of it, that we are going to, especially on a college campus. Look, a college campus is where you are supposed to learn how to think. You are supposed to be challenged. You're supposed to have new ideas sent to your brain. You're supposed to kind of work them out and then bring something back. Write a paper. If your professor is telling you about capitalism and you hate capitalism, well, take in the ideas of capitalism and now write your great thesis on socialism, if that's what you believe. Again, that's not what I believe, but if that's what you believe, then go for it. So the idea of safe spaces, that or these trigger warnings. So they're gonna, if there's gonna talk about the history of America. Now we have a bloody history, as does literally every country on earth. If you have to warn people that they might be offended, and then maybe they won't have to take a test, or they're gonna go in a room with puppies. I mean, these are real things. You are actually you're doing something offensive, actually, is what's happening. You are stealing from them their ability to think in the place that they're supposed to learn how to think. And so the idea that we'd give them these safe spaces where they don't have to hear these ideas, how do you think they're going to get out there in the real world and have to deal with real issues? No one owes you anything in this world. And yes, we all come from different things. We could look, I have Holocaust survivors. I lost family on both sides of my family in the Holocaust, and I have survivors on both sides. One I have just a few miles away from me here in Los Angeles, 94-year-old woman who has done genealogy with my family, which unfortunately, because of the tortured history of the Jews, we have great records because of all the horrible things that have happened. And she's tracked my family back into the 1700s. But she doesn't live as a victim, this 94-year-old woman who lives in a two-story walk-up in Los Angeles. She lives as someone that's proud of her life. And that's what we have to instill in people, that yes, some people come from poorer things. Some people come from nothing. I mean, look at most of the immigrant experience in the United States. My great-grandparents came from Europe with nothing. Most Italian immigrants came with nothing. Irish immigrants, the immigrants who come today from Uganda or Haiti or wherever they come, or from Mexico, most people come with nothing. But the beauty is, in almost every instance, our system has allowed people to come with nothing, let the next generation be better, the next generation be better, et cetera, et cetera. And that basically works. And if there's a better system for that, I just haven't seen it on Earth. Now, I know the cool thing right now in America is to be like, well, look at those Scandinavian countries. They're doing great now. Obviously, they have a whole set of problems, especially Sweden, but also they're tiny, basically homogenous societies. We're a giant multicultural country that has respected the rights of all these people. You can come here. We welcome you here. We're a nation of immigrants. But at the same time, you have to become part of the melting pot. You can bring your traditions, but the tradition you have to really believe in more than anything else is the tradition of freedom. And that's why we have to fight for that now instead of cowering from it.
Well, it's interesting you've moved the debate in a sense onto immigration, and you're, as you've stated, the descendant of immigrants, Jewish immigrants who came to America. There's been a lot of talk about immigration in your politics. There's been a lot of talk in ours as well. Do you think that Western societies are right to try and restrict immigration, or should it be the case that immigration has helped make us who we are today?
Well, I would say first, every nation has the right to do what it sees fit.
Sure.
Period. I mean, there's a reason you're in one country, I'm in another country, and we can each fight to hopefully make our countries, fit within our ideals. I mean, that's the beauty of borders. So It's like, on one hand, we have all these people that say we should have no borders, there should be no borders, everyone can come and go, and it's like, actually, the reason you have borders is so that you can protect a certain set of ideas. But that set of ideas shouldn't be based in skin color or racism, but it can be based, the people of some countries want more freedoms, want to fight for more freedoms. Some countries don't, and they want more of a socialist society or whatever it is. I said the same thing all along throughout the election that I'll say now. Trump kept pushing the wall, and I kept saying, look, we have a border. If a wall will fix it, will fix people coming over, then perhaps a wall is sensible. But I don't know that there's any evidence of that. I don't even know that it's economically feasible. And there's a lot you can do just with electronic surveillance and drones and all sorts of other things to protect the border. So I think unfortunately, we've gotten hung up on the idea of this physical thing, when in fact we do have a border and there's a way you can patrol it. So as far as immigration generally, look, if you want to come, I can only speak from the American perspective.
Yep, that's fine.
If you want to come to America and do the very thing that virtually every immigrant has done, virtually every immigrant, regardless of your color and your religion and all of that stuff, but come here and make a better life for yourself. You know, the people who left India, and then many of them ended up owning convenience stores, which is not the most luxurious job in the world in America, but then their children became middle class, and now the Indian community is thriving in America, right? I mean, the Asian community, a lot of these people left wherever they left, China or wherever, they came here, worked really hard, and then their children all have it better now. The problem is, and I think the Jewish community is suffering from this too, is that the more you succeed as a minority, so if you're Indian or you're Asian or you're Jewish, the more your community succeeds because you care about education and you focus on jobs and the things that you're supposed to care about, the more the left doesn't need you, because they need their minorities to be oppressed. And that's why the left actually is so rabidly anti-Israel, but rabidly anti-Jewish also, because they can't accept a minority that has succeeded. They need you to feel that the system is working against you. That's a very sad way of viewing things. And I've been saying for months now that the next enemy of the left is the Asian community. Because guess what? If you're going to treat people differently, well, who's going to get hurt? You know who's going to get hurt? It's going to be the people that are playing by the rules. It's going to be the people who work hard and study hard and put emphasis on family and jobs and education, most importantly. And that's very much the Asian community, broadly speaking, in America. So they're going to be the ones that are going to actually be hurt if you feel like you have to give special treatment to other people. So there should be no special treatment. We need equal opportunity. We need laws that do not discriminate. And we have to treat people equally. But once you start dividing people up by these groups and by the perceived oppression, it doesn't even have to be real oppression. They have to perceive that they're oppressed. It's a recipe for disaster.
Well, again, it's interesting you bring in Israel and the Jewish angle to this discussion on the left. Do you think in contemporary America it's possible to be pro-Israel and on the left?
Well, of course, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I would have said yes, because most Jews are, I think, still are Democrats, and it's a tough one. So right now, I think most Jews, if you poll, I'd love to see some polling on this. I think most Jews probably still identify as Democrats more than Republicans. Mm-hmm. But look, the Democratic Party, when the Dyke March happened here in Brooklyn about a year ago, and some Jewish lesbians brought an Israeli flag, the Star of David, which is a symbol of Judaism far longer than the state of Israel has existed in a modern sense. They were told to leave. Bernie Sanders goes to speak at the women's rally, and because he's a man, he's told to leave. So again, that's just another example of how they just purge. There's nothing that's good enough for them, because you always have to be more oppressed, as I've laid out here. I would say in terms of Israel, it's becoming increasingly hard to be a member of the left or a Democrat and also a supporter of Israel. I mean, the left they don't like minorities that succeed. So if you look at Israel as a microcosm of that, Israel is an absurdly tiny country the size of New Jersey that without the West Bank is about 6 miles wide at one point, with its one international airport, just steps away basically from what would be another country. That they don't like the idea that how did this tiny little place that was nothing but a desert and nothing, they made the desert bloom. How did they possibly succeed in this incredibly hostile place on earth, not just because of its neighbors, but because of literally its geography? This place that had no oil, even though everyone else had oil. I know Israel has some natural gas now, but they hate the idea that you can be a minority and be powerful, because it actually destroys their argument about everything, really. So I don't see any place really in the modern left anymore to be a leftist and pro-Israel. I mean, they hate Israel the most, and that's really sad, because Israel is the place that defends progressive values, even some of the progressive values that now I don't even believe in. You can be. I was in Tel Aviv about 2 years ago. I saw a gay couple walking on Ben Gurion Street holding hands in the Middle East. Two guys. I mean, what country in the Middle East will defend that? And that's the same place that the supposed tolerant side hates the most. So of course it's just nonsense. And no matter what, Israel can do whatever. Look, it can get out of Gaza. Do they care? Do they care? No. There's no Jews in Gaza. The left should be. Oh, Israel did something good, but there's nothing they can do. And I'd rather be alive and have some weapons and be able to survive than be liked by a bunch of people that are going to hate you either way.
So, but it's interesting. It's one thing perhaps to say that, look, Israel's been successful, we now hate it, or even, Jews have been successful, they're no longer a minority we particularly affiliate with. But there's a difference between that, isn't there, and the kinds of anti-Semitism we're starting to see emerge. What explains, in your view, this morphing of, say, anti-Zionist, anti-Israel feeling into actual anti-Semitism?
Yeah, well, look, first off, this idea that anti-Zionism somehow is not anti-Semitism is crazy. Look, there's many Christian majority countries. There's many Muslim majority countries. There's one tiny Jewish country, again, with whatever it is, 7 million people or so, 20% of whom are Arab and have the exact same rights as the Israelis. Not to say there aren't some problems in Israel. Of course, there are, but it is by far, without question. And anyone watching this, you just inherently know it. It is by far the most tolerant society in the entire Middle East. Go to any other country in the Middle East and see what happens with it when an Orthodox Jew walks around there. See what happens when a Christian with a big cross walks around there. Guess what? It doesn't happen, and those people don't even exist in those countries. So the conflation, if you are look, you can criticize, as I said before, you can criticize ideas, right? So if you want to criticize the idea of Israel, no country or person is above criticism, of course. But if your unrelenting focus is on this absurdly tiny place that happens to be inhabited by a people who have really been the scapegoat of the entire world for, at this point, thousands of years, right? The many thousands of years, who have been booted across countries because they couldn't defend themselves. And they were always the other. And that's the irony. The left pretends to love the other. But they don't really love the other, because if you love the other, you'd be using this tiny country that defends freedom, as flawed as it may be, as a beacon of shining hope. So yes, if you are unrelentingly focused on Israel and how many Jews live near Bethlehem, then yes, of course you're an anti-Semite. I don't like to trade in this kind of talk because I don't think it really gets the conversation further if you tell someone they're a racist or an anti-Semite or whatever else. But I think the best way you can fight for the cause of Israel is to simply explain. I mean, first off, welcome people there. People should go there and see actually what's going on. I went to Jerusalem, and I'm literally walking by women in burqas and Orthodox Jewish men, and they're sitting on buses together. I mean, that's real. There are Supreme Court justices that are Muslim in Israel, and I think their Miss Israel is Arab or whatever it is. But none of that proves what you would see on the ground there. And again, that doesn't mean it's perfect, but this obsessive hatred of Israel, of course, it has a little something to do with Jews.
Just a little, in that kind of
just a tiny. I mean, look at the UN, the farce that is the United Nations, the absolute farce, which spends all day long, UN Security Council resolution after UN Security resolution, focused on the one tiny democracy of the Middle East, while they have absurdly horrible regimes that are sitting on human rights councils and all of this nonsense, and they're endlessly focused on Israel. Where are all the condemnations of how many Yemeni people have been killed by Saudi Arabia? It's something like 10,000 in the last couple of months. That's far more than have died in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the last probably 30 years. So there's an endless focus on it. People don't understand geography. I think they
need to look at a map.
Israel is this giant expanding thing, and it's just not. I mean, we can talk settlements if you want, but the settlements haven't expanded 1 square mile in effect on the ground in 20 some odd years. So it's unfortunate that this conversation just gets so heated for everybody, because I think if you actually paid attention to what reality was, and if you really understood things, if you wanted to talk about apartheid. Well, there's estimates that 50 to 70% of the Jordanians are actually Palestinians. They don't have equal voting rights. There's something like 73. I'm giving you loose numbers here.
Yeah.
Jobs that Palestinians that live in Lebanon can't have. The Palestinians in Syria are still kept in refugee camps. So their own people, their own brothers, treat them far worse, actually, than the Israelis do. And again, that doesn't mean the Israelis are perfect. Of course not. But they have made offers.
Yes.
Netanyahu goes to the UN every year and says, Abbas, I'm here. Let's talk. You want to talk? I'm here. I'll meet you anytime. You want to have lunch? Come on. And Abbas refuses to. And it's like, at some point, you just have to do what's good for you. And I think that's the path that Israel's on, and I think that's fine.
And do you think that includes recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital?
Well, first off, look, what's the last line that every Jew on earth says at the end of the Seder? Next year in Jerusalem. Israel united the city. The city was, it's funny, everybody's always against divided cities, right? We don't want Berlin to be divided. We don't want cities to be divided. But for some reason, when the Jews control it, we want it to be divided. Of course, it's nonsense. Yes, are there portions that are more Arab and Muslim, and there's portions that are Christian and Armenian, and they're Jewish? Of course. But the geography of all of this, as you know, is so insane. You've got the Western Wall under the Dome of the Rock, which is the Temple Mount, because there was a temple there before there was a mosque there, for all the people that wonder who was there first, or any of that kind of nonsense. I think basically, wait, what was the original question? I was going on a crazy tangent.
Well, essentially about the Jerusalem being should it be recognized capital of Israel?
So look, of course it's every nation on earth, every other nation on earth gets to say what its capital is. So again, if you say that Israel is the one nation that can't pick where its capital is, yeah, that might mean you have a little something with the Jews that you got to work out. I think in effect what Trump did, because nothing's moved yet. I know Bibi now is saying something's going to happen in the next year, but I think in effect what Trump did was strategically maybe even better than what physically has happened, because basically he said, look, the Palestinians refuse to negotiate. They literally will not come to the table. So if you will not come to the table, we're going to start changing the parameters of the reality. And we're going to say, okay, well, now Jerusalem's off the table. Now, I probably would have argued that Jerusalem should have been off the table anyway, but Ehud Olmert, 10 years ago, was putting it on the table. Well, all right, if you refuse to negotiate, we're going to slowly take things off the table. That's actually negotiation. I mean, that's actually what Trump is good at. So I don't know what Trump's real views on this are inherently. I mean, he's obviously very much an Israel supporter. He's defunding the UN. They're taking money away from the Palestinian Authority that literally pays people to kill Jews. So I think on most of these things, he's basically been right. The capital is Israel. The capital of Israel is Jerusalem. And there was never a nation of Palestine, and there certainly was never any other nation that had Jerusalem as its capital. Actually, before 1967, when Jordan controlled it, Jews weren't even allowed to go to the Western Wall. Israel opened it up, made it an international and tolerant city. And I think these are just the facts that for some reason today the left just hates facts.
Dave, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you too. We'll see you again soon on JTV.